we want to continue on with our Dissident Dialogues coverage. So at the Dissident Dialogues coverage, which Russell attended as press over the weekend, Briana Joy Gray, friend of show, possible friend of show, maybe friend of show. Now, Briana Joy Gray, hopefully friend of show.
Hopefully friend of show.
She appeared as part of an Israel-Gaza war debate panel. Now, we are not allowed to show any video from this until Dissident Dialogues drops theirs. They asked us not to, so we'll play nice about that, obviously. But here are some still photos. Here's Briana on the panel. Here's a close-up of her. That look pretty much sums up the time she had. It was a tough room, a tough crowd, a tough debate panel, too. As you can see, these are her debate opponents, the Penguin and the Riddler, left and right. So really hostile adversaries, two Batman villains she was up against there. But Russell actually got to meet her after the panel. She vented to you a bit. That's how you know it was a tough crowd, folks. Russell Dobular was her shoulder to cry on after. That's how you know that was a brutal room.
I was.
But I watched the debate, and she did very well considering that room. I mean, she did pretty well, I think, just like objectively speaking, but especially given the fact that how many people were in the audience? 300? I think you were the only one there who actually like agreed with where she was coming from.
Let's put it this way. If anyone else did, they were quiet about it.
Yeah.
I guess you know what? If he was there at that panel, there must have been one, because there was one guy who came up to me after that with Dawkins who had witnessed it. And he was like, I said not one person recognized me. I'm wrong. That was the one person who did. It was at the very end after Dawkins. He came up to me, said, "Oh, yeah, I saw you at Matt Taibbi's event in Brooklyn a few months ago." I was like, yeah. And he was like, "What, Dawkins didn't know you were recording? You literally asked him and had a camera there." So,
right.
So there was one guy who probably would have been on the other side of that panel, but that was a lonely minority in that room. All right, yeah. I mean, this whole room, you got to look at the speaker lineup. Who's gonna pay the kind of money they wanted? I think the base ticket was over $300.
Yeah, you said $375.
I think it was $375. So, we got a press pass. We didn't pay for it. That's not where your money's going, folks. Don't worry.
No.
But
I would not have signed off on that expenditure.
I wouldn't have suggested it. I wouldn't have suggested it. But for free, sure.
Yeah, why not?
But who's going to pay to see this lineup? I mean, the only time you had anyone who was legitimately left, it was this specific panel of Gaza. Everything else was, very Dawkins and McWhorter, and it was the whole anti-woke thing, which, I don't know,
sorry to cut you off, but I don't know who her ddebate partner ended up being, what this guy in the middle's name was. It was supposed to be Nathan Robinson, but I guess he backed out or something fell through. Yeah.
It fell through. I can't get into that. But yeah, so Nathan wasn't there. It was that guy. And hey, look, man, that guy came prepared. He had like facts and he pulled out quotes and stuff. But it was just such a hostile room. Listen, I said this, I can't remember if I said it to Schellenberger or Lee Fong. 2 years ago, I think this would have played differently. It feels like something that's completely behind its cultural moment. It feels like this is a cultural conversation from 3 years ago. This feels like a conference from 3 years ago. And the reason for that is they can't deal with current events without exposing their own hypocrisy. They'll only reference current events obliquely, as McWhorter did. Well, I would have thought that until 2 weeks ago.
Well, exactly. Well, if you notice, when we interviewed Ryan Long on the Jimmy Dore show, he said during the interview, he also said off camera, when we pitched to him the woke versus the racist comedy sketch, he's like, do we really want to show that? I feel like that's kind of passé. That's kind of 2 years ago. Like, who cares anymore? And I agreed with him at the time, not to insult his bit. It's a good bit. It's perfectly fine. But I agreed with him at the time. And I agree with him more now. And I think you agree with him more now.
I agree with him more now because you know what? Okay. I understand more now why people assumed. I think post October 7th, as I say, it's been clarifying in both directions. I think a lot of people before October 7th thought I was one of those people, and we used to get a lot of that. We don't really anymore. I have always been honest where my views overlap with some of those views on transgender medicine, on being resistant to the idea that because America is bad, all of America's adversaries are by definition good. Um, I've always said I'm not saying that because I'm a Western chauvinist. I'm not saying that because I'm bigoted. You see, but a lot of people who said that didn't mean it. I actually meant it, and I think I've proven that, and that's why I don't see a lot of comments like that anymore. But now I understand more why I got those comments than I did before, because I always felt like I was being very clear, but now I kind of get it because, yeah, like there's this whole complex of people who are basically Republicans, traditional Republicans. They're like Nixon era kind of Rockefeller Republicans, and that just doesn't sound cool. They want to sound edgy. They want to sound edgelordy. So they'll describe themselves as the intellectual dark web. And then you listen to what they have to say. It is very conventional right-wing pro-empire bullshit. I mean, it's not, it would not, none of these views would be out of place in 1974 other than the concessions that they've made to the left in regards to gay rights and feminism. Obviously, they're not going up there saying bitches got to get back in the kitchen. So, to the extent that they're not like old school Republicans, it's to the extent that they've been influenced by the left. And because of that, that's the claim that a lot of them will make to being a classical liberal. But if that's what a classical liberal is, then a classical liberal is essentially a Rockefeller Republican. It's essentially a socially liberal, economically conservative, pro-empire thing. So you're a Republican who doesn't hate gay people. That's all. What's all this about? Dissident.
Yeah, no, it's a bunch of garbage. I mean, so you had a talk with Briana for about 10 minutes after.
So getting back to this. All right. Yeah. So yes, I digress. All right. So, we've said before, like Jimmy, the guy you see on the show, is the guy you meet. And that is true. Although I will say this, nobody is that guy. Like, you might feel like you watch me and Keaton do this, you know us. If you hung out with us for a day, you'd know us a lot better than you do from watching the show, because you're going to pick up on body language and facial expressions that just don't come up in this context. And that's true of Jimmy too. Like, there are subtleties to his personality that don't come out on the show because they're not useful in that context. So sitting there 7 feet away from Briana at most, the way they positioned her, I was in the front row. They happened to put her right there, right in front of where I was. So I'm watching every ripple on her face of disgust and horror as these ghouls, Eli Lake and the other guy, I think that guy's, he works at Reason Magazine.
Yeah, Eli Lake. I don't know who the other guy is, but I know Eli Lake is the guy who did the As a Jew podcast, where like we have to stop, giving cover to these people who they say as a Jew they oppose Israel, right? Basically saying that all Jews who oppose Israel are essentially a shanda, right? Which is a shame and embarrassment to Judaism. So yeah, I mean, this is the low. I mean, I don't know who the other guy is. He was based on what he said, he was awful, but I knew Eli Lake going in.
Yeah, these guys were just fucking scum of the earth. And the guy, the other, I don't think it was Eli Lake, although we'll see when they drop the clip. We'll get back to this in a more extended segment. But one of them said, well, it's not, I think he said 7 million. I think he said, well, it's not 7 million Danes. Like, he went full Pat Buchanan.
Yeah.
And Bree's face was just like, and what really horrified her, you could see, was the audience, because the audience applauded at all of that when they were talking about dead children, and she mentioned this in her tweets.
Yeah, let me
a woman actually laughed.
Yeah, let me put this up now while we're on this. So she tweets out after the debate, and like I said, they are being very protective of their video, so we would play that if we could. We'll play it over the course of the week. But someone in the front of the crowd laughed tonight when I brought up dead Palestinian kids. I turned and looked at them, and they just kept smiling and laughing at dead children. It was chilling. It's one thing to see it on the internet, but to look in the eyes of that kind of evil in real life was something else.
Yes. It was not a crowd where you wanted to be one of two pro-Zionists in the room. No, they clapped at all of this just horrible, racist, reductive. The whole weekend was deeply anti-Muslim, just constantly. There was not one good word to say about student protesters, Muslims. They had a display set up about the Uyghurs. Where's the display about Louisiana? Because their display was about forced labor and how forced labor from Uyghurs gets into the supply chain. All right, I'm not going to litigate that, but let's say it's true. We know that's true in this country. The AP just dropped a whole report. And let me be clear, and again, we'll get into this more when we cover this more in depth. I talked to the organizers. I interviewed both of them on camera. And I told both of them, I'm kind of here representing an anti-woke left. But watching this concert, you would think that everyone who believes that Gaza is a genocide also believes that men should be swimming against women. And that's not the case. There are a lot of people who are not in that camp who don't combine those things. And that's not represented here. And I started naming off. I said, you got Jimmy Dore. You got Norman Finkelstein lives right here in New York. You got Max Blumenthal. You got Aaron Mate lives here. Max definitely would have come up for this. And to their credit, they said, you're right. This is the first year. That's something we should correct. I got the email of the main organizer, and I am supposed to email him with a list of people for these panels next year.
I hope it works out. I am not holding my breath because I don't think it's an honest oversight. I think they deliberately want to hide the anti-woke, if you will, left because they want to be able to join free Palestine people with the blue-haired woke people. Like that, and we've seen that in action. What's wrong with people calling for a ceasefire? Oh, they're woke. They're ugly. Megyn Kellam called them ugly. They're ugly, lonely, asexual wokesters, right? They want to be able to tar anyone like that. That's why End Wokeness tweeted out against the minimum wage. They want to tie economic leftism and anti-imperialist leftism to wokesterism so that they can smear the anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist left. And this is partly why Russell has been saying for as long as he has that you have to distance yourself from that certain, I'll put woke in air quotes so it's not offensive to people who, depending on your definition of the word, whatever, you know what we mean, right? Distance yourself now so they can't do this, right? Yes. But it's one thing to say that it is a matter of strategic importance that we should differentiate ourselves so that they can't do this. But that doesn't make them any smaller of douchebags for doing it. They are still douchebags for doing it. It's still extremely dishonest. It still serves militarism and capital. They're still
fucking scumbag douchebag.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what I'm going to say. And I mentioned to you now, I haven't been around New York much over the last few months, but the 1 week I went to get a haircut and I was recognized twice in a half an hour. Other than that one guy, and it's been about a year since I've been able to go to a political event without being recognized by anybody. And we were much smaller a year ago. I don't think I was recognized there. So this is what I will say on the, devil's advocate side. This is a whole bubble unto itself where we're not even on the radar of these kinds of people. Now, somebody like Jimmy Dore, obviously they're aware of. You mentioned Jimmy Dore, they know who he is. But this is the political branch of the whole pop psychology, Anthony Robbins, Johann Hari, Andrew Huberman, how are you going to improve your life today? Come join me this weekend and find out how to get through those barriers in your mind. Right. This is the political branch of that whole TED Talk, South by Southwest, tech bro world, right? It's all very self-actualization, which lends itself towards a certain style of republicanism. Now, the most interesting person on that stage was the guy who got his card, and I hope we have him on. What's his name?
Sohrab Amari, something like that. He runs Compact Magazine, which is like the socially right, economically left magazine. I use those terms broadly because I don't know how like socially conservative they are, but they're more like culturally conservative. There was that great piece that Sarah Wagenknecht put out on Glenn Greenwald. This was like a year ago. We covered it about the difference between social conservatism and cultural conservatism. Like if you're anti-choice, you're socially conservative. If you're pro-choice but also pro-family, that would be culturally conservative. In other words, you don't want to impose social conservatism on other people, but you practice a sort of cultural conservatism that's in line with the kind of people who live their lives in a socially conservative way. You just don't want to impose it on others. I don't know where they fall on that, so I hesitate to call them socially conservative, but they're more a family values-oriented left.
Well, I heard him speak, and that's why he was, okay, most of these people, it was just boring, even though, hey, like the panel on gender, the panels on feminism. I agreed with them, but even though I agreed with the overall points in some of that, obviously Schellenberger ran the panel about the WPATH files, which we actually reported on when he dropped it. But I guess I wouldn't have minded those things in a context where they're not ignoring the elephant in the room, which they relentlessly did.
No, and of course. That's their context is they're the biggest victim in the world. This thin, this like skinny, short-haired lady talking about how she was run out of town because she wouldn't use they, them pronouns because that was an offense to her womanhood. Get fucked, lady. How's that? Get fucking fucked, you fuck.
Okay.
If men aren't in your bag, go find the janitor closet, find a broom handle you can make a good use of. Like, fuck you. Like, I don't want to hear it. You have such a chip on your shoulder. This is the problem with these people. They have a chip on their shoulder. That's a very unattractive thing to have a chip on your shoulder. I say this about Jordan Sheridan all the time. It's not that Jordan Sheridan does bad work. He's got a chip on his shoulder. He has a superiority complex, and he feels like, he's not way more famous because people who watch YouTube are too dumb to appreciate his great work. That's the way a lot of these people come off. It's like your problems, not to say they're not real problems, but if you're doing a conference about speech the week that this Orwellian anti-speech bill was passed through the House, and you're still carrying on like you're a martyr because you don't want to use they, them pronouns and the university disciplined you for it, I'm sorry. Eat shit. Eat shit.
Okay, so you're talking about Kathleen Stock, who was on that feminist panel. And I said the same thing because she unlike a lot of people there, as left. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're identifying as left and as a lesbian, and you got driven out of the university. And as everybody knows, I'm sympathetic to that. But this is not the context of 3 years ago. Okay, this is the context of students are having their heads cracked open. So if you're representing yourself as a dissident academic who was driven off campus about these pronouns, okay, fine. Speak up and say, and I think what's happening to these students is horrible.
Exactly.
Total respect. I'd have total respect, but not one fucking word about that. Now, is that because she doesn't believe that or because she was reading the room? I don't know. Actually, when I was interviewing one of the organizers, he mentioned her as an example of someone on the left that they had. And then he said, well, if you're talking about more Marxist, I mean, the closest thing to a Marxist in that room, and that's what was interesting, was the guy from Compact Magazine.
Right.
And that's why he caught my interest, because he was making a classically Marxist defense of a more conservative society. And he said, and again, I agree with this, he says, well, you have all this sexual liberation, people are having less sex, so obviously it's not working.
Right.
But if you want stronger families, you have to create the economic conditions for family life. So you need a New Deal order, he called it. Basically, family, bring back the New Deal. That's what he was arguing for. Like And you so rarely see that from anyone who's socially conservative, that he recognizes, well, you got to put your money where your mouth is. If you actually want to create a world that's more oriented towards family values, you need to create the economic conditions that allow for families. You did that in that sea of just absolute tech bro bootstrap imperial nonsense. That was like a firework display in the middle of that room. And that's why I approached him immediately afterwards. His son was like holding onto his leg. That's why I asked him for an interview, but he gave me his card. Hopefully we'll get him on the show. That would be a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, no,
that
would be great.
cat
Yeah.
was legit. That cat was legit. That was very interesting.
No, they're an interesting magazine. I thought it was a good idea for a magazine when it came out because it's relatively new. It just came out a couple years ago. But I want to touch on this Briana thing real quick, if it's okay.
Right. Yeah.
So she gets a lot of replies, and she takes a lot of shit online and in person, as you can see. And that person,
I will address that after this.
Okay. And that person was correct, meaning the person who laughed about the dead kids. And that person was correct because you have very selective outrage and you don't know or care about the evil Israel is facing. And she says, I started my remarks expressing sincere remorse for civilian lives lost on October 7th. So I just want to reintroduce my idea because I always said this. I've said this, and maybe you are more receptive to this now after this, where you got to see her in action. I always said, her fatal flaw at times is her competitive streak. And I think because she spent years in the Bernie campaign where she had to deal with trolls like that on the shit lib side and right-wing trolls, and then she's exposed to people like that on a regular basis, not just here, but I mean, Robbie, although in fairness to Robbie looks like fucking Kwame Ture next to her debate opponents there. But so that was especially thing. But like, if you're in this kind of battle mode every single day, you're going to come out of that hyper competitive, sometimes competitive to a fault, because you're so defensive of your side that you defend them even when they are ridiculous. And that's always where I thought she made mistakes. But I understand why. I've always understood why. Like, I get it. Like, if you're in fight or flight mode constantly, that's going to manifest to a fault on occasion.
All right, so I'm going to focus down to the topic at hand so we can move along to the next segment. Okay, so I could tell from her body language that she was going to run like a thief from that stage as soon as the panel was over. So I got ready. So I grabbed my camera. I ran over. Fortunately, she recognized me because security was about to body check me. They were ushering her out the door because she
You're
clearly
lucky they didn't
wanted
body
to get
check
out.
you anyway. You're lucky she didn't tell them to body check you, but she didn't. She was cool.
No, she was like, no, he's all right. He's all right. So we went outside. And, man, I mean, it's off the record. I'm not going to get into details. That's up to her to, disclose what she wants. I don't think I'm disclosing anything by saying she was fucking livid and horrified, as anyone would be.
She basically implied as much on
she said.
X,
yeah,
on Twitter, yeah.
And I mean, she was waiting for a car. We talked for about 10 minutes. And so this is what I will say, going back to what I said about Jimmy. Man, did the Briana that I dealt with in person seem fundamentally different from the Briana I've seen on YouTube? No, but it's still different. It's just still different when you're seeing a human being, because in this medium, in this mode, you're an image. I mean, you're an image. You're an image is being projected, right? And I got to say also, meeting Briana and being in that room with her, it is clarifying. She herself has often decried the infighting on the left. And I will say, sitting in a room where I may have been the only person who really supported her is clarifying. It is clarifying because now you're allies again in a sea of enemies. Right. We're the only sane people in the fucking room, right? All the shit we disagree with goes to the side. And in the end, after spending 2 days in a room like that, the idea that it's not clear who is on what side, it becomes kind of ludicrous. Now,
Right.
what has been frustrating for me with Briana, and I will say at this point, I've gone too far in some of my rhetoric. I should have pulled back a little bit on that. And honestly, I'm sorry about that now. After sitting there and seeing, like, I don't deal with those crowds on the regular. Now, this is what hopefully we'll discuss in person. This is what's strange about the lane that Briana occupies ideologically. In my experience, most of the people who have the right positions on, say, Gaza, on economics, on not voting for a Democrat, on being hard line about that, they tend to be deeply skeptical about a lot of the woke stuff. They tend to be anti-woke, or at the very least keep some distance from it, even if they don't speak about it. Like Max and Aaron, I've never heard them talk about it one way or the other, which in and of itself says something, right? I've never seen them just tweet a flag. You know, I feel like I can imply certain things, or at the very least, they feel it's an area that's counterproductive to what their efforts are. Briana is very unusual in that her economics and politics are not what I would call lib adjacent, and yet she's not skeptical of the agenda of trans activists at all from her public statements. She will say things comparing homeschooling to child abuse. She will say these things that are very liberal class that don't jive with that. Now, to me, what's so frustrating about that is I feel like it empowers the people in that room, and it drives people over to that. So it's more frustrating for me if you have the right opinions, because then you can't just be dismissed as a lib, because now you have opinions that are core left opinions, and it's reinforcing the idea that people who believe that, it makes it much harder for someone like me to make the argument, no, the people who think Gaza is a genocide are not the people who want men swimming against women, because you are that person, and they're going to point at you, and they're going to say, well, what about her? So listen, this medium, as some people have observed, encourages very hot rhetoric. It encourages very antagonistic rhetoric. And yeah, I mean, we should definitely all pull back on that where appropriate. I mean, there are some people who are really fucking scum of the earth. But yeah, being in a room like that where you're watching somebody who agrees with you on most things, in this room full of Western chauvinist ghouls, freaks, and vampires, that's very clarifying about who's on what side. And I think the other things should probably just be discussed in a spirit of enlightenment, the kinds of enlightenment values that symposium claimed to represent.
Yeah, we should talk about it like Richard Dawkins would talk about it.
In
Look
theory,
to Richard Dawkins.
but do that for real.
Yeah,
do that for real. So all this to say, Briana did agree to come on the show, which hopefully she will do. An invitation has been extended.
Yes, because we would like to actually watch this debate back with her here for it.
Well,
ideally, when they drop the video.
Yes, that would be the ideal. So we'll hopefully be able to do that.
Please clap.